Chapter 1 Ministry of Justice Prison, a dilapidated structure on muddy, decaying ground. A woman appeared to have been dismembered. Her 10 fingers were swollen and bruised, clearly showing signs of torture with clamping sticks. Her arm, completely broken, hung limply at her side. Both leg bones were shattered, and her body was covered in wounds inflicted by a sharp weapon. Pieces of flesh were turned outwards. What does purgatory look like? It's no different than this. Pain. Beyond the pain, there was only more pain, yet a flicker of strength remained, and she stubbornly cried out, "I'm innocent. Victoria Lennox framed me. I won't confess. I absolutely will not confess." Her harrowing, hoarse screams echoed through the dark prison, like a call from hell, sending chills down the spines of even the jaded jailers accustomed to bloodshed. What a tough nut to crack. The Ministry of Justice has exhausted dozens of torture methods, yet she still refuses to recant. Jailer A exclaimed, "It seems she truly is innocent. An unfavored noblewoman, what good will her cries of injustice do here?" Jailer B scoffed, "Whether she confesses or not, she won't escape this crime, only prolonging her suffering. See, the Carter family has sent more silver, she won't survive the night." Jailer A shuddered involuntarily, whispering, "This general is truly ruthless, even a tiger wouldn't eat its own cub. This is his own daughter. What do you understand?" Jailer B sneered at him, "In the eyes of these lords, there is only wealth and power. For glory and riches, they would abandon even their own mothers, let alone a daughter they haven't seen in over a decade. Where did his general title come from? Wasn't it thanks to his father-in-law's support? Would he dare offend his wife for this girl? True enough." Jailer A sighed, glancing back at the mangled, bloody mass in the cell. That mass could no longer be called human. Her tragic cries resembled the whimpers of a wild beast, the mournful wails of a vengeful spirit, each sound filled with blood and resentment. The sheer misery made one's hair stand on end. "Wronged, wronged." She continued to cry out, until the sun set and darkness fell. Annoyed by her incessant cries, the old man administered the poison ahead of schedule. She convulsed a few times and quickly expired. Brutal punishment, blood-curdling screams of agony. In the deep, dark prison, a woman, like a tattered rag doll, with bloodied hands, reached desperately towards Tamara Carter, wailing, "Wronged, wronged." Tamara Carter, chilled to the bone by the woman's cries, instinctively recoiled, but the tattered rag doll relentlessly pressed closer, its bloody hands clutching her white blouse, refusing to let go. The rag doll continued to cry out, "Wronged, wronged." The scene was so bizarre that Tamara Carter suspected she was hallucinating. She desperately tried to wake from this nightmare, struggling, but a sharp pain shot through her waist as if someone had kicked her hard. Simultaneously, a voice cursed, "Tamara Carter, I advise you to confess. Don't waste our time." Tamara Carter looked up, in an instant, as if struck by lightning. Before her eyes, where was her bright, white laboratory? In the dim, gloomy light, rows of wooden fences lined up, the people inside lying and squatting in various positions, all sallow, emaciated, and ragged, all wearing heavy shackles, including her. The feeling of rusty metal imprisoning her limbs, cold and sharp, the stench filling her nose. The person talking to her was the jailer in a black and red outfit, seeing her agape and speechless, the whip in his hand lashed out without mercy. The burning pain on her shoulder reminded Tamara Carter that this was not a nightmare. It was reality. She, a modern forensic scientist, guided by a vengeful spirit, had transmigrated into the body of Tamara Carter in this ancient time. Unbelievable. But now she had no time to be surprised or upset. Because according to what happened in her nightmare, next, the original owner, for not confessing, would suffer all kinds of brutal torture. Tamara Carter really had no interest in reliving the suffering the original owner had endured, in this hellish place. Pleading innocence and not confessing was simply self-inflicted torture. Therefore, she quickly calmed down and said to the jailer very calmly, "I confess. That's how obedient you should be." The fat jailer groped her, laughing lewdly, "Looking at this smooth skin, I really can't bear to lay a hand on you. Later, give me some sweetness, and I guarantee you'll eat well and dress well, and even if you die, you'll die comfortably." Tamara Carter said nothing, looking at him coldly, suppressing the urge to break his neck. The fat jailer was about to grope her some more when someone suddenly rushed in from outside. It was a middle-aged man with a rat-like face and a mustache, wearing a dark blue official robe, who shouted as soon as he entered, "Is my master still here?" The fat jailer's face twisted. "Master Dawson, didn't you tell me to deal with him?" "Ah. Dealt with? Dead? Expired?" Landon Dawson's face turned pale and he collapsed. It's over, it's over. Without master, what am I, the chief judge of the High Court, supposed to do?" "Master, what happened?" the fat jailer hurriedly asked. "Big trouble. Imperial concubine Sterling, His Majesty's beloved concubine, has been murdered." Landon Dawson scratched his head and said, "His Majesty summoned me to solve the case, but I. He stammered for a while, ultimately not daring to speak his mind. In reality, he had just bought this official position, usually only knowing how to show off and extort money, taking from both the plaintiff and the defendant. How could he know how to solve a case? "Master, has the newly found master not arrived yet?" the fat jailer asked again. "That damned fellow, he hasn't even set off yet. He won't arrive for 5 to 7 days. Landon Dawson stamped his feet. "What should I do? What should I do?" He kept lamenting. The late spring weather wasn't actually that hot, but he was drenched in sweat, soaking his official robe. Tamara Carter saw this, her heart stirred slightly, and she called out softly, "Master Dawson. I have a way to help you." "You?" Landon Dawson glared at her furiously. "If you were so capable, you wouldn't be here in prison, delivered by your own stepmother." Tamara Carter blinked, turned her head to look at the 2 corpses lying in the adjacent cell, and said softly, "Sir, I know the cause of death of those 2 prisoners who died suddenly." Landon Dawson glanced at her. The one in gray was suffocated, the thin one in blue was struck by a blunt object, resulting in cardiopulmonary trauma and death. Tamara Carter's tone was flat, but the fat jailer became inexplicably tense. "How could you possibly know that?" "I know how to perform autopsies. Naturally, I also know how to solve cases. I'm certain I can assist you, sir." Tamara Carter's tone was confident, her expression calm. "You're currently at an impasse, sir, so why not give it a try? If it doesn't work, you can simply escort me back to my cell. You have nothing to lose, do you?" Landon Dawson's expression shifted unpredictably, perhaps shocked by Tamara Carter's recent display, or perhaps, in his desperation due to his acute illness, he was grasping at straws. After a brief moment of contemplation, he waved his hand and said to the old man, "Release her." Chapter 2. Half an hour later, Tamara Carter, dressed in forensic attire and equipped with the necessary tools, accompanied Landon Dawson into the palace. Consort Sterling's Purple Sun Palace was now crowded with people. Alexander Sterling, the concubines, the Empress Dowager, the princes, and the high-ranking officials were all present, each wearing a look of horror, for the murder scene was truly gruesome. Consort Sterling was murdered during her afternoon nap in the Lotus Pavilion of her Purple Sun Palace. It was precisely noon, and she, preferring quiet, had dismissed her attendants. Unexpectedly, in broad daylight, someone dared to wield a blade and attack her. The assailant's methods were exceptionally brutal, directly severing Consort Sterling's throat. The entire Lotus Pavilion was awash in blood, with bloody handprints covering the pavilion pillars and railings. Consort Sterling's hands were clean, clearly indicating that the bloody handprints belonged to the murderer. This audacious villain, with unparalleled audacity, even calmly finished a cup of tea after the killing before departing. But he didn't anticipate that his ostentatious display of dominance would provide Tamara Carter with numerous advantages. Tamara Carter carefully examined the blood-stained teacup. Under the sunlight, the bloody fingerprints were remarkably clear. She unconsciously curved her lips. It seemed that heaven wouldn't block all her paths. With these fingerprints, she could swiftly conclude this case and focus on her own affairs. She carefully placed the teacup into a cloth bag when a lazy voice suddenly inquired from beside her, "Have you discovered anything yet?" Tamara Carter was slightly startled. This voice, this tone, she seemed to have heard it somewhere before. She looked up and saw a young man in luxurious attire leaning against a camellia flower tree beside the lotus pavilion. While everyone else kept their distance, fearing the blood and the corpse in the pavilion, he seemed unconcerned, idly scratching his head with a camellia flower branch, one leg swinging, and his eyes glancing at Tamara Carter. Tamara Carter remained silent, coldly staring at him. This man's appearance was truly handsome, with bright, sword-like eyes, a high, straight nose, skin as white as snow, and lips as red as cherry blossoms. However, his handsome face was filled with an air of indifference. He wore a purple robe with a loosely tied belt, his hair slightly disheveled. Unlike other men in the court who kept their hair neatly tied, he used only a silver string to tie it casually. As the wind blew, his hair danced wildly, adding to his wicked, arrogant, and unrestrained demeanor. "I asked you a question. Are you mute?" The young lord flicked his robe, strode towards her, his lazy eyes suddenly turning cold. Tamara Carter looked at him, feeling a chill run down her spine, but she didn't avoid his gaze. Instead, she stared directly at him and replied, each word distinct, "Your Highness, I am certain I can apprehend the culprit." "Oh. So quickly?" Third Prince Lucas Sterling's lips curled slightly. He leaned forward, his eyes sharp, cold, and seductive, as if trying to see through Tamara Carter. Tamara Carter still didn't flinch. Their eyes met, their bodies close. Lucas Sterling suddenly seemed startled and murmured, "A woman?" "Yes." Tamara Carter looked at him almost defiantly, her reply unwavering. Lucas Sterling's round, black eyes suddenly transformed into beautiful crescents as he burst into laughter. "Interesting. This is incredibly interesting. Lucas." Alexander Sterling called out in annoyance. "The royal physician is examining the body and investigating the case. What are you doing causing trouble there?" "Father, how would I dare cause trouble? I'm merely reminding her that if she doesn't find the culprit today, she won't be leaving. Empress Sterling will invite her to the underworld for tea." Lucas Sterling flung his wide sleeve and leaned back against the camellia tree. His words made Landon Dawson extremely tense. He hurried over and tugged at Tamara Carter's sleeve, lowering his voice. "Are you truly certain?" "Don't worry, sir. I've found concrete evidence. I just need," she whispered in Landon Dawson's ear. Landon Dawson, half believing, left and quickly returned with what she requested, a large sheet of white paper with the oil-ink fingerprints of everyone in Purple Sun Palace. Everyone was bewildered, but Tamara Carter didn't bother explaining. She simply examined the fingerprints, comparing them to the ones on the teacup. In the modern era, this would be done with specialized equipment, as fingerprints are too complex for the average person to distinguish with the naked eye. However, Tamara Carter was no ordinary person. She possessed an exceptional memory. Everything she saw, no matter how small or complex, remained vividly imprinted in her mind. She couldn't forget even if she tried. Therefore, distinguishing fingerprints was a trivial matter. She chose this method because she heard from the palace staff that the time of the murder, during the midday break, was incredibly quiet. No outsiders entered or exited Purple Sun Palace. Therefore, the culprit was likely still within the palace. Apprehending the culprit was the easiest part. Within the time it takes to burn an incense stick, she located the culprit's fingerprints on the large sheet of paper. She pointed to the name and winked at Landon Dawson. Understanding, he hurried off with his men. Less than a quarter of an hour later, he returned triumphantly, escorting a burly maid-servant. Clutching a bundle of blood-stained clothes, he excitedly announced, "Your Majesty! Your Majesty! We've caught the culprit. This damned girl was actually a man in disguise." Everyone gasped, simultaneously rushing towards him, instantly engulfing Landon Dawson and the cross-dressed woman. Tamara Carter lowered her eyes, exhaled softly, found a bamboo chair, sat down steadily, and took a small sip from the teacup on the round table. "You are indeed quite capable." Lucas Sterling sauntered over, leaning his upper body onto the round table in front of her. "I wonder where your ladies' chambers are. Would this young master be permitted to visit when I'm free?" Tamara Carter chuckled coldly. "Your Highness, the third prince, has a poor memory." "What do you mean?" Lucas Sterling raised an eyebrow. "We are old acquaintances." Tamara Carter tilted her head, looking at him. "A year ago, Your Highness rescued my mother and me at the dilapidated temple and personally escorted us to the king's birthday celebration, allowing us to return to Carter Estate and reclaim our rightful positions. Such great kindness, I would never dare forget." Tamara Carter spoke these words through gritted teeth. From the moment she heard Lucas Sterling's voice, she knew he was the masked figure who had instigated Emily Carter's return to Carter Estate. Through the original owner's memories, she knew that the original owner and her mother were nearly assassinated by the former mistress of Carter Estate, the second concubine, Victoria Lennox. As a result, they were saved by the third prince, Lucas Sterling, who also helped them successfully return to Carter Estate and reclaim their identities. But clearly, behind all of this, there must be an ulterior motive. It's just still unknown what Lucas Sterling's scheme truly is. Of course, the original owner didn't know. She didn't have such a good memory. Even after encountering Lucas Sterling several times at Carter Estate, she remained oblivious. Lucas Sterling was genuinely startled this time, exclaiming in disbelief, "You're Tamara Carter. How is that possible? Aren't you supposed to be in Ministry of Justice prison?" Tamara Carter replied coldly, "As you can see, Master Dawson brought me here. That old man only cares about money, how could you possibly persuade him?" Lucas Sterling still refused to believe it. He reached out, lifting Tamara Carter's face, while his other hand groped around her face, muttering, "What is this black stuff on your face?" Chapter 3. His stillness would have been better. With his movement, the pungent smell of cosmetics and alcohol wafted directly into her face. Tamara Carter frowned in disgust, swatting his hand away. Lucas Sterling was startled back, about to get angry, but couldn't suppress his curiosity. Tamara Carter tore off the mask on her face, revealing a beautiful visage. Lucas Sterling was slightly shaken. The woman before him, with skin as white as snow, dark eyebrows, and a bone structure like ice and jade, exuded a cold and arrogant aura, her presence overwhelming. These eyebrows, this appearance, it was indeed Tamara Carter. However, this aura, this inviolable coldness, was vastly different from the timid, easily startled rabbit-like young lady in his memory. "Are you truly Tamara Carter?" he unconsciously asked again. "Just the other day, you sent someone to Carter Estate to contact me, wanting me to work for you, and now you've forgotten." Tamara Carter scoffed. "It really is you." Lucas Sterling laughed arrogantly. "So, you were playing dumb all along. This prince thought you didn't recognize me at all. What's the meaning of this now? Do you want to make amends and work for this prince after all?" Tamara Carter, seeing his smug grin, wanted to slap him, but under the circumstances, she swallowed her anger and replied, "I've thought it through." Lucas Sterling laughed even more arrogantly. "It seems the Ministry of Justice prison is truly a remarkable place, capable of transforming a person, awakening their spiritual senses. How wondrous! It is indeed a wonderful place." Tamara Carter said coldly. "I will pray day and night that His Highness also has the opportunity to visit that place one day, so as not to waste this life." Such a kind and virtuous young lady. Lucas Sterling laughed shamelessly, unfazed by Tamara Carter's sarcasm. He pulled up a chair, sat close to her, and chuckled. However, I never engage in unprofitable ventures. You, currently bearing a serious crime, are a liability. I have a way to clear my name, Tamara Carter stated, her eyes cold. But I need His Highness's assistance. I wonder if His Highness possesses such capability. Assistance? Interesting. Such an intriguing proposition. Very well, I accept this matter. Lucas Sterling threw back his head and laughed heartily. Tamara Carter gave him a sideways glance and said coldly, then, Your Highness, let's have a pleasant cooperation. With that, she put on her mask, turned, and walked away towards the noisy crowd. Lucas Sterling stopped laughing, watching her retreating figure thoughtfully. The coarse cloth couldn't conceal her tall, graceful figure. She walked in the spring breeze with steady steps, the wide cloak billowing around her like a celestial being, accentuating her elegant and refined appearance, captivating his gaze. Only when she merged into the crowd did he come back to his senses and call out, James Allen. A young guard with a stern expression rushed to him and bowed, asking, Your Highness, what are your orders? Lucas Sterling whispered a few words into his ear. James Allen turned and left. Lucas Sterling stood up and slowly walked towards the crowd. As soon as Tamara Carter appeared, she was surrounded by people, their curiosity overflowing. They asked one after another, how did the coroner know the maid was the murderer? Tamara Carter calmly replied, because the deceased will speak. Her words were so shocking that everyone began to murmur, even Alexander Sterling couldn't contain his curiosity, asking, how can someone who is dead speak? Your Majesty, Tamara Carter bowed respectfully, although the person is deceased, the murderer left their own essence during the act. The deceased, filled with resentment, will retain this information, it's just that ordinary people cannot see it. Then how can you see it? I was born with a unique eye, naturally able to discern the clues within. Everyone was astonished. Alexander Sterling stroked his beard and sighed, truly a prodigy of our Longwell kingdom. You apprehended the culprit who murdered the noble consort in such a short time. I am deeply gratified. Someone, reward her. Tamara Carter knelt with a thud and said loudly, Your Majesty, such a small contribution is not worthy of a reward. I only beseech Your Majesty to clear my name. Her words caused a stir, Landon Dawson cried out in distress, and Alexander Sterling exclaimed in astonishment, What did you just say? Divine Maiden. You are a woman. The Divine Maiden is Tamara Carter, the legitimate daughter of Carter Estate. Tamara Carter tore off her mask, revealing a coldly beautiful face. Those who recognized her gasped. Edward Carter, his mind reeling, rushed forward, grabbing her sleeve and furiously shouting, You wretch! How dare you escape from prison? Landon Dawson, you conspired with a prisoner? Landon Dawson shrank back, silent, while Tamara Carter, ignoring Edward Carter, continued speaking. Your Majesty, this morning, I was falsely accused of murdering 5th Prince Daniel Wright's personal guard. My father, without discerning right from wrong, imprisoned me, causing me great sorrow. I beseech your Majesty, considering my recent small contribution, to re-examine this case. I possess a unique gift of sight and will certainly clear my name. Alexander Sterling looked hesitantly towards Edward Carter. Minister Carter, is this true? Your Majesty, there is such a matter, but not as this girl describes. The evidence is irrefutable. Otherwise, how could I bear to imprison my own daughter? It is a misfortune to have such a monstrous child. Your Majesty, he wiped away tears, his face a picture of shame and regret, a truly masterful performance. Tamara Carter, nearly nauseated by this display, stood tall and unwavering, stating clearly, right and wrong cannot be determined by my father alone. If he truly cares for his daughter, let the coroner and Lord Wright's body be brought to Carter Estates Buddha Hall to reconstruct this morning's events. I will confront him there. If he can explain the questionable points on the body, I will willingly accept my punishment. With that, she kowtowed repeatedly to Alexander Sterling until her forehead was bloody, crying out, "Your Majesty is the true Dragon Emperor. I trust in your Majesty. I beg you to grant me justice." Moved by her pleas, Alexander Sterling felt a surge of pity. At this moment, a white-haired elder stepped forward, saying, "Your Majesty, I believe Tamara Carter is intelligent and unlikely to commit such a depraved act. Let us follow her suggestion and re-examine the case. Don't listen to her lies." Edward Carter stamped his foot. "This woman is skilled in deceitful words. The evidence is irrefutable. If the evidence is irrefutable, then there is nothing to fear from a re-examination," another official calmly interjected. "This will also allow her to be convinced. Minister Carter, this girl is your daughter. Though separated for over a decade, she is still your flesh and blood. How can you imprison her so readily? Even a tiger does not devour its cub." His words resonated with the crowd, prompting murmurs of agreement. Minister Randy Orton, father of Consort Sterling and Minister of Justice, already grateful to Tamara Carter for avenging his daughter, now felt immense sympathy upon realizing she was the unfavored Tamara Carter. He spoke loudly, "Minister Way is right. Minister Carter, if you wish to avoid accusations of cruelty, you should agree to a retrial. With your Majesty presiding and us officials present, justice will be served." Chapter 4 Everyone unanimously demanded a retrial. Cold sweat dripped down Edward Carter's face as he looked helplessly towards his father-in-law, Cody Sterling. But what could Cody Sterling do? His supporters were numerous, yet today, something was amiss. It seemed as though they had been outmaneuvered, his people having no opportunity to intervene. Of course, no one's words truly mattered. What mattered was Alexander Sterling's stance. Tamara Carter had chosen her moment well. Her achievement had put Alexander Sterling in a position where not assisting her would seem inappropriate. Amidst the clamor, he swiftly decided that, as per Tamara Carter's request, the case would be retried at Carter Estate. Hearing his decision, Tamara Carter finally breathed a sigh of relief. Only then, as she relaxed, did she realize her clothes were soaked with sweat. Her head throbbed from the force of her earlier kowtow, and her legs trembled uncontrollably. This body was too weak, a far cry from her physique in the modern era. She sighed, struggling to her feet. Despite her weakness, she had to persevere. Another fierce battle lay ahead. Lucas Sterling, pushing through the crowd, observed her from afar. Clearly exhausted, yet stubbornly rising, her back straightened, her icy demeanor filled with resolute pride. She was a stark contrast to the timid girl he remembered. He tilted his head, murmuring, "The Ministry of Justice prison, does it truly possess such miraculous effects?" James Allen, beside him, foolishly replied, "Sir, perhaps I should also take a trip to the Ministry of Justice prison." Lucas Sterling shot him a contemptuous glance. "Are you mad? Bring my horse at once. I intend to watch this spectacle unfold." With Alexander Sterling presiding, the various officials worked with unusual speed. Daniel Wright's body was quickly carried into the Buddha Hall and, following the morning's testimony of Victoria Lennox and the housekeeper, placed upon the altar. The wretched coroner, George Brown, was also brought in, seated on a small stool, his expression uneasy. Alexander Sterling declared, "Tamara Carter, you claim you can clear your name. Then begin your questioning." Tamara Carter took a deep breath, gave a slight bow to those around her, and let her cold gaze sweep over George Brown. In a low voice, she asked, "George Brown, do you have experience in conducting autopsies?" "I have performed autopsies at the Capital City Administrative Court for 21 years, George Brown replied. "My experience is quite extensive." "Then, when you first entered the Buddha Hall, how was Daniel Wright's body positioned?" Tamara Carter inquired. George Brown responded indifferently, "Just as it is now." "Then I ask, was the head of the body slumped, or as it is now, rigidly extended beyond the altar. Tamara Carter pressed. George Brown grinned, revealing yellowed teeth, rigidly extended, of course. Rigor mortis occurs after death. Is Miss Carter unaware of this? How long does it take for rigor mortis to set in? Tamara Carter continued. Anywhere from half a watch to 2 watches, perhaps. Variations in temperature and climate can cause some differences. Then, before rigor mortis sets in, does the body become quite pliable? Naturally, after death, the muscles first relax before rigor mortis sets in. At this point, George Brown's face abruptly changed color, and his voice caught in his throat. Tamara Carter coldly snorted, "If you claim Master Wright died within the Buddha Hall, then, according to the principles of forensic examination, in the post-mortem period of muscle relaxation, Master Wright's head should have fallen forward onto the incense burner, and absolutely not remained upright as it is now." George Brown's expression shifted, horrified into silence, as Tamara Carter pressed further. Daniel Wright's head is upright like this because the Buddha Hall is fundamentally not the primary crime scene. Everyone present finally understood the issue, and Alexander Sterling snorted coldly, asking, "George Brown, what defense do you have left?" While she was struggling, it's possible she moved. Daniel Wright's body. George Brown began to sweat, his speech becoming increasingly hesitant. Tamara Carter raised her head with a cold laugh. "So, your implication is that I began struggling after Daniel Wright's body had already exhibited rigor mortis? How ludicrous. Everyone saw this morning that when you arrived, I was still struggling beneath the body. At that time, Daniel Wright was already in rigor mortis. Am I so foolish? To not take advantage of his death to sneak away, but instead lie naked there for hours?" George Brown was rendered speechless by her questioning, and Victoria Lennox couldn't help but interject, "It's also possible that you were intimate with him and then fainted. Does the second concubine and father frequently become so aroused during intimacy that they faint?" Tamara Carter sharply retorted. Everyone burst into laughter, Lucas Sterling's laughter the loudest and most unrestrained, as he roared, "General Carter, so you are so vigorous. Truly inconsiderate of the fairer sex." Edward Carter's face flushed crimson, and Victoria Lennox, gnashing her teeth in hatred, opened her mouth to scold, "Tamara Carter, in broad daylight, you dare to say..." Tamara Carter quickly cut her off. These words were first uttered by the second concubine. "Tamara has been so tragically framed, and a concubine of Carter estate still wants to add fuel to the fire, speaking ill behind my back. Is there any sense of decency?" Victoria Lennox, interrupted, was choked into silence, only able to glare fiercely at Edward Carter. Edward Carter, inherently fearful of her, felt extremely uncomfortable under her glare and could only glare back at George Brown. George Brown, with a pained expression, though out of arguments, still spoke, "In any case, Daniel Wright indeed died from a drug overdose, and the drug was found on your person. You cannot deny this point, can you?" "What do you mean, cannot deny?" Tamara Carter responded coldly. "Is your mind addled? I just stated very clearly, I could not possibly lie motionless beneath a body for hours. Actually, the second concubine isn't wrong. I did indeed faint, but not from the kind of excitement she imagines. I was struck unconscious. The second concubine instructed me to copy scriptures in the Buddha Hall, but as soon as I entered, I was knocked out. During that period of unconsciousness, wasn't I at the mercy of anyone who wished to frame me?" "What are you implying?" Victoria Lennox jumped up. "Are you saying I framed you?" "My daughter would absolutely never frame anyone," King Cody Sterling stated coldly. He was Alexander Sterling's cousin, having made significant contributions to Alexander Sterling's ascension to the throne. With illustrious merits and as the former Prime Minister, his power was immense. Within the court, he had numerous factions. As soon as he spoke, his inherent authority silenced the room. Everyone restrained their laughter, no longer daring to be so frivolous. But while his tactic might intimidate others, it had no effect on Tamara Carter. She glanced at him indifferently and calmly replied, "Your Highness exaggerates. I merely stated facts, I had no intention of suspecting the concubine. Rest assured, your Majesty is wise and just. With His Majesty present, no one will be wrongly accused. You've talked for a long time, yet you still haven't presented concrete evidence proving your innocence in this case, have you?" Cody Sterling glared at her with his cloudy eyes. "Don't be hasty, Your Highness. I will present the evidence immediately." Tamara Carter stepped gracefully towards Daniel Wright's body, pointing to the reddish bruise on his shoulder. "George Brown, do you know what this is?" George Brown grimaced and shook his head. Speaking more meant more mistakes, it was better for him to remain silent. Besides, he genuinely didn't know. Chapter 5, You dare to claim decades of experience in forensic examination. Tamara Carter scoffed. "Let me tell you. This is called a ligature mark. When a person is alive, the soft tissues of the body, upon contact with a hard object, will leave a mark. Due to muscle tension and skin elasticity, this mark will quickly disappear. However, after death, the muscles lose their tension, the skin loses its elasticity, and the limbs become limp. Marks at points of compression are retained for a longer period and can even reflect the surface shape of the object that made contact." Her explanation left George Brown speechless. A voice called out from below, "I am Ivan Wright. May I ask Miss Carter, if we find the object that corresponds to this mark, can we identify the true culprit?" Tamara Carter looked towards the voice and saw a young man with refined features. She nodded at him. "Master Wright is very astute. If we find the object that corresponds to this mark, the murderer will not be able to escape." "Tisk." An official sneered. "But where should we look?" Tamara Carter looked at him coldly. "No need for you to trouble yourself, sir. This mark is easily recognizable. It comes from the second Miss of Carter Estate, Sophia Carter." "Ah!" Another wave of shocked gasps arose. Edward Carter jumped up furiously. "You damned girl, don't spout nonsense." "I never speak nonsense," Tamara Carter said coldly. "This mark comes from the hairpin on Sophia Carter's head. It's the unique gift the fifth prince gave her on their engagement day. There's absolutely no other like it. If you don't believe me, just compare it to the mark, and everything will be clear." Sophia Carter, leaning weakly against Victoria Lennox, paled and trembled upon hearing these words, as if about to faint. Fortunately, Victoria Lennox supported her, allowing her to remain standing. But Tamara Carter's next words caused her to collapse once more. "The square pattern beside this ligature mark must be from the jade mat on Sophia's bed, isn't it?" Tamara Carter said slowly. "This jade mat is also one of a kind. It's said to provide warmth in winter and coolness in summer. Truly a marvelous treasure. I must say, Father is indeed a rare and exceptional father in this world." Sophia Carter's eyes rolled back, and she fainted on the spot. Victoria Lennox wailed and cursed Tamara Carter, but Tamara remained impassive. She strode forward, snatched the hairpin from Sophia Carter's head, and placed it on the ligature mark. As it was placed, fitting perfectly without a millimeter's discrepancy, a sinister smile crept across Tamara Carter's lips. "I told you, the dead will speak." Her words, laced with ice, sent chills down the spines of everyone present. Ivan Wright roared in indignation, "So, the murderer of my younger brother is none other than the second daughter of the Carters. Minister, now that the truth is revealed, shouldn't you give the Wright family an explanation?" Edward Carter hastily waved his hands, speaking urgently, "There must be some misunderstanding. Sophia has always been gentle and obedient, harboring no resentment towards your younger brother. Why would she kill him? Moreover, Sophia woke up early and was with her mother in the garden, enjoying the flowers. During the time of Daniel Wright's death, she was not in her chambers. Many servants can testify to this." "Indeed. We can testify. Butler Robert Collins called out from below. The second miss was with the madam in the garden tending to the flowers early this morning. She only rushed to the Buddha Hall after something happened to the eldest. Miss. She couldn't possibly have killed him. The second miss didn't do it. More servants rushed forward indignantly to testify, we all saw her. The second miss was in the garden tending to the flowers. I saw it too. A woman with slanted eyes stepped forward. She was the third daughter of the Carter estate, Lily Carter, usually adept at flattery. Now, she pouted with feigned outrage, second sister is gentle and kind, she wouldn't even hurt an ant, how could she commit such a heinous act? It's eldest sister, there's evidence to support this claim. Could it be that eldest sister snuck into second sister's chambers, committed this deed, and then shifted the blame onto second sister? Tamara Carter chuckled, posing a counter-question, according to third sister, then why is that hairpin still adorning second sister's hair? Lily Carter was speechless, unable to respond. She twisted her waist in frustration and retreated. The servants began clamoring again, the scene descending into chaos. Suddenly, a loud shout rang out, it was Ivan Wright leaping forward. He roared in fury, today, I have witnessed the upbringing of the Carter estate. Such clear evidence, yet you dare to fabricate lies here. Minister Carter, even if you can cover the sky with one hand, you cannot treat human life like grass, killing at will. The Wright family is weak, with only 2 brothers remaining. Today, even at the risk of our lives, we must settle this matter with you. Edward Carter, drenched in cold sweat from Ivan's words, stammered in explanation, that hairpin does belong to Sophia, but, at that time, she truly wasn't in her chambers, this. Tamara Carter slowly interrupted him, Father, according to the law, servants in the estate are not qualified to testify for their masters. A master can take their lives or demand false testimony from them, it's commonplace. Your Majesty, what do you say? Alexander Sterling's face was grim, he remained silent, his gaze fixed coldly on Sophia Carter. In truth, from the moment the hairpin perfectly matched the wound on Daniel Wright's body, he had reached a conclusion. Sophia Carter's pale face and repeated fainting spells only further exposed the truth. Daniel Wright undoubtedly died in Sophia Carter's chambers, but the reason for his murder remained a mystery. Sophia Carter, numb under his gaze, her face ashen, tears and snot streaming down her face, wished she could sink into the ground. Alexander Sterling, filled with disgust, wanted nothing more than to strangle her and demand answers. However, she was the 5th prince's fiancée, and Daniel Wright was the 5th prince's guard. This matter concerned the royal family's reputation, so he truly couldn't investigate further. Tamara Carter waited for a long time, but the response she received was a deathly silence. Although she had anticipated this situation, she still couldn't suppress the disappointment in her heart. Cody Sterling detected a glimmer of hope on Alexander Sterling's face. Having followed Alexander Sterling for decades and understanding him well, he glared at Victoria Lennox, who only then seemed to regain her composure. She grabbed a nearby maid and shouted, Daisy Lane, you wretch, did you do this wicked deed? Daisy Lane, caught off guard, looked bewildered. Victoria Lennox continued to scold, Sophia's hairpin, weren't you the one keeping it today? And you're always the one cleaning Sophia's room. You wretch, what shady business have you been up to, harming guard Wright and dragging Sophia into this? Madam, I didn't. Daisy Lane exclaimed, kneeling and pleading. Victoria Lennox slapped her, shouting, you wretch, still won't confess. Your parents raised you in vain. If they knew you did such a thing, they would be angered to death. Hearing this, Daisy Lane's face paled. Having served Victoria Lennox and Sophia Carter for years, how could she not understand the meaning behind her words? She was using her parents' lives to threaten her, forcing her to take the blame. She was unwilling, she was wronged, but she also knew that at this point, she had no way out. After a period of intense struggle, she wailed, it was me. I poisoned guard right and framed the eldest miss. #### Chapter 6. Everyone was stunned, then exchanged knowing smiles. However, being officials, they didn't show it on their faces, only tilting their heads to continue watching this tedious drama. Tamara Carter lowered her eyes and said nothing more. What else could she say? Alexander Sterling's silence spoke volumes. If she persisted, she likely wouldn't gain anything. One must know when to stop, mustn't they? Lucas Sterling crossed his arms, watching her with amusement. The crying and screaming drama before him was utterly boring. This young woman was much more interesting. Truly intelligent, knowing when to stop. Just now, she was fiercely intimidating, and now she wore a calm expression. Hard when necessary, soft when necessary, such a woman was. Very much to his liking. Before this noisy drama, Alexander Sterling's face flushed slightly. He glanced at Tamara Carter. Her long eyelashes concealed the emotions in her eyes. She lowered her gaze, sitting quietly, no longer displaying the rigid coldness from before. Alexander Sterling cleared his throat and spoke, Daisy Lane, why did you kill guard right? Confess the whole truth. The reason? Daisy Lane's eyes widened, her mind in turmoil. Forced to confess falsely, resentment filled her heart. Where would she find the presence of mind to fabricate a motive for murder? She mumbled, but no words came out. She could only stare blankly at Victoria Lennox, crying, Madam, the reason? What reason should I give? A snort of laughter escaped someone's lips. A slight commotion rippled through the crowd, but under Alexander Sterling's imposing presence, it quickly subsided. Victoria Lennox continued her feigned distress, this lowly servant, still playing dumb. How could I have raised such a treacherous ingrate? This thieving wretch. She kicked and stomped on Daisy Lane until she vomited blood, at which point Daisy Lane confessed through tears, I stole second Mrs. Silver. Guard right saw me and was going to report it to her. I had no choice but to poison him. To cover my tracks, I poured medicine into his mouth. After he died, I was terrified. I thought that in this estate, only eldest miss was weak and easily bullied, so I framed her. You vicious wretch. Tamara has always treated you servants so well. Edward Carter berated Daisy Lane, then turned to Tamara Carter, taking her hand and saying with choked emotion, Tamara, I was wrong about today. I've wronged you terribly, and I'm so sorry. As he spoke, tears fell onto Tamara Carter's hand, feeling like venomous pus, making her skin crawl with disgust. This scene, this pretense, felt eerily familiar. In her previous life, her polished, official father had shed similar tears when her mother was imprisoned, feigning grief, remorse, and regret. But was it genuine? When she learned the ugly truth, she couldn't help but vomit, right there in court, onto the man who had always played the role of the good father and husband. The original Tamara's mother, like her own, had loved a deceitful, shameless, utterly vile man. Now, history was repeating itself. Despite trying to suppress her emotions, Tamara Carter couldn't stop trembling. Seeing her silence, Alexander Sterling spoke in a low voice, Tamara Carter, what are your thoughts on Daisy Lane's confession? Tamara Carter took a deep breath, quickly left her seat, knelt down, and prostrated herself, saying respectfully, Your Majesty is wise and just. The truth of this case is now clear. Daisy Lane is the murderer. Your Majesty's presence at Carter Estate has cleared my name. I am eternally grateful and can only offer my loyalty. Long live Your Majesty. Alexander Sterling's face brightened, and he said gently, What an understanding child. Rise. Thank you, Your Majesty. Tamara Carter started to rise, but her vision darkened. Edward Carter rushed to support her, feigning concern, Poor Tamara, you haven't had a proper meal since being imprisoned. It's all my fault. I will make it up to you. No need, Tamara Carter said mournfully, looking at Edward Carter with icy eyes. My body and being are gifts from my parents. I wouldn't dare blame you. If you want to make amends, make them to my mother. When she married you, you were destitute. To help you pass the imperial examinations, she toiled day and night sewing and embroidering, ruining her health. Now you are the esteemed Prime Minister. I will treat her well. Edward Carter, his face purple, hastily interrupted her. Tamara Carter laughed coldly and said sorrowfully, she doesn't need father to treat her well anymore, only for father, as the head of Carter Estate, to give her a proper funeral. You, what are you saying? Edward Carter's body trembled, his expression embarrassed and ashamed. How can you curse her? Father, mother is dead, don't you know? Tamara Carter's face was cold as frost. Father, stop using those rotten wooden planks to board up her room, open the door. Let Tamara collect her body. As soon as these words were spoken, the crowd buzzed with discussion, everyone speculating that Tamara Carter truly possessed supernatural insight, when in reality, she had simply asked Lucas Sterling to send someone to investigate beforehand. Alexander Sterling signaled with his eyes, and a nearby guard quickly left, returning shortly after to whisper in Alexander Sterling's ear, Your Majesty, Emily Carter is ragged and emaciated, tragically dead, her living quarters filthy and dilapidated beyond recognition, clearly, tortured to death. Alexander Sterling's heart tightened, and the image of the dilapidated courtyard suddenly appeared before his eyes, the strong, cold wind blowing, the dying woman like a scrap of paper lying amidst the mud, dry leaves, and dirt, her sorrowful eyes staring fixedly at him, unclosed even in death. His breath suddenly became heavy, his chest ached, the nightmarish scene causing him to break out in a cold sweat, restless and unable to sit still. He closed his eyes tightly, his fists clenched, teeth gritted. After a long while, he exhaled a bitter, sour breath, adjusted his clothes, and stood up. Tamara Carter was also surprised. What had gotten into Alexander Sterling? Her small act of piety shouldn't have warranted such generosity. Everyone was astonished, only Lucas Sterling's mouth curved into a slight sneer, which quickly vanished as he resumed his usual debauched and carefree demeanor. I'm tired, return to the palace. Alexander Sterling's distant voice rang out again. Before he finished speaking, he strode out of the Buddha Hall as if someone were chasing him, followed closely by a throng of officials and guards. The procession soon disappeared from the Carter Estate courtyard, and everyone rose from their prostrated positions to see them off. This play had finally reached its curtain call. Unrelated individuals gradually departed, leaving only the Carter Estate members in the Buddha Hall. Chapter 7 Tamara Carter slightly lifted her eyelids and gestured indifferently toward Steward Robert Collins and the two maids, ordering, the three of you, follow me to collect the body. The two maids glanced at Victoria Lennox, whose face remained impassive, showing no reaction. As if receiving a signal, the three of them pursed their lips and remained motionless. The master has given the order, are you deaf? Tamara Carter stepped forward, standing before them. The three individuals feigned ignorance, remaining unresponsive. Tamara Carter blinked coldly, if ears serve no purpose, then remove them. Her words had barely left her lips when a flash of icy light, swift as snow, appeared in her hand. In an instant, a bloody image followed the light, scattering in all directions. No one saw how she moved, but the three individuals simultaneously clutched their ears, screaming in agony like pigs being slaughtered. Tamara Carter, what are you doing? Victoria Lennox shrieked. I am disciplining servants, second concubine should not interfere. Tamara Carter stared directly at her, each word precise and sharp, you are merely a concubine, you do not have that authority. My mother may be deceased, but I remain the legitimate eldest daughter. If you truly wish to be in charge, you must follow the laws of the Longwell dynasty, be formally appointed by my father after 3 years, then you may speak freely. You, Victoria Lennox, enraged, flew into a fit of rage, lunging towards Tamara Carter like a madwoman. Tamara Carter sidestepped effortlessly, leaving Victoria to stumble into empty air. Unable to regain her balance, her nose slammed into the hard surface of a bookcase, instantly gushing blood. Edward Carter's face paled in alarm, and he rushed forward to support her. At that moment, a deep, aged voice resonated, "The second concubine cannot speak out of turn, this old woman is not yet dead." Tamara Carter turned her head, gazing towards the old woman who had been feigning death in the Grandmaster's chair, barely concealing her contempt. This was the original owner's own grandmother, Margaret Carter, the mother-in-law whom Emily Carter had served with utmost devotion. Yet, what kind of person was this Margaret Carter? In Edward Carter's hometown, the dilapidated Triple T town, she, Margaret Carter, was the sole authority. Among the adult men in Triple T town, those who had not slept with her could be counted on one hand. The sons she bore had to be shameless individuals like Edward Carter. However, fate was unfair, granting them a pleasing appearance and a silver tongue. Emily Carter marrying him was like white cloth falling into mud, forced by her mother-in-law to sell herself. She refused to the death, and Margaret Carter regarded her as a thorn in her side, a nail in her flesh. Once her son married the daughter of a wealthy family, naturally, she had to be cast aside. Such a filthy, unbearable old woman still had the audacity to act like a grandmother in front of her. Looking at Margaret Carter's wrinkled face, still adorned with rouge and powder, Tamara Carter felt a surge of nausea, nearly vomiting. She snorted coldly and said, "Grandmother is indeed still alive." However, this granddaughter was merely disciplining some disobedient servants. Does grandmother have anything to say? Servants are also people. How can you just cut off their ears? Margaret Carter jabbed her cane erratically at the ground. Has grandmother never done such a thing? Tamara Carter raised an eyebrow. A few days ago, there was a young man named Alan Tucker in the courtyard. Simply because he refused to enter grandmother's inner chambers, even unto death, grandmother had him thrown onto the back mountain to be eaten by wolves. Oh, and yesterday, there was a maid who spilled hot water on second concubine's hand, and she ordered the maid's hand to be chopped off. Compared to you, I am truly in awe. You. Margaret Carter nearly fainted from anger. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, Tamara Carter swiftly interrupted, "Just now, father said in front of His Majesty that I treat the servants too well. I've thought about it carefully, and it is indeed a grave flaw. Today, I will rectify it. Thank you, father, for your guidance." Edward Carter gaped, speechless, while Tamara Carter, ignoring him, gestured to 2 maids and 2 manservants, and, not forgetting Robert Collins, ordered them to follow her. This time, no one dared disobey, and they trailed behind her, trembling. She walked northwestward, passing the magnificent pavilions, ornate winding corridors, and vibrant gardens of Carter Estate. Along the way, the scenery was truly captivating. Yet, who could have imagined that behind such splendor, there existed a corner of such desolation and ruin? As she neared her destination, Tamara Carter felt her throat tighten and her steps falter, but she pressed on resolutely. Finally reaching the northwest corner of Carter Estate, she opened the ornate garden gate set within the pink and white wall. Before her stood a dilapidated wooden house. Its tiled courtyard was strewn with debris and overgrown with weeds, the blood-red sunset casting a pall of sorrow over the scene. It must have been difficult for Victoria Lennox to create such a place within the opulent Carter Estate. Even the lowest servants in the estate lived better than these 2. Tamara Carter stepped forward to prepare the body. The maids and manservants, faces filled with horror, dared not approach. Tamara Carter hadn't intended for them to assist. Handling a body was second nature to her. This body belonged to her dearest loved one, a task she would entrust to no one else. Gather firewood, boil water, and clean the courtyard, Tamara Carter commanded coldly. Also, prepare bath supplies and 2 new sets of bedding for me. The 5 obeyed without hesitation, quickly setting to work. By the time everything was ready, night had fallen. The spring night was still chilly. Tamara Carter dismissed Robert Collins and the 5 servants, who fled as if granted a reprieve. In the silent courtyard, only she remained, beside a corpse and an oil lamp, a solitary figure. Fortunately, Tamara Carter had grown accustomed to this solitude since the age of 12. "Mother, time to bathe," she murmured to the body, gently closing Emily Carter's staring eyes. Removing the tattered clothes, she carefully placed her mother into the warm water and meticulously washed her. The crescent moon hung like a sickle in the sky. In the dimly lit room, beneath the flickering lamplight, Tamara Carter, her long hair unbound and clad in a tattered gray robe, carefully combed Emily Carter's hair. Memories of the past seemed to flood back in that moment. In her past life, her father, driven by ambition, had plotted against his devoted wife, who had endured hardship alongside him. Had it not been for a forensic examiner who used a scalpel to unravel the mystery, her mother would have languished in prison for life. From then on, she held immense respect and admiration for the profession of forensic medicine. Yet, despite surviving that ordeal, her mother eventually succumbed to grief and passed away. The past, sharp as a knife, pierced her heart. She bowed her head, biting her lip, fighting back the tears that welled up. Suddenly, chaotic footsteps and a woman's arrogant shriek broke the quiet of the small courtyard. "I don't believe in evil spirits. Even if that bitch becomes a ghost, I'm not afraid. I will avenge my second sister." Before she could finish, the woman burst through the door, a gleaming longsword held against Tamara Carter's neck. I wondered who it was. "So, it's my dear third sister." Tamara Carter laughed cruelly. "Have you come to kowtow to our mistress? I scoff at that." Lily Carter spat. "That vile old woman." She was about to unleash a torrent of abuse, but her eyes fell upon the body floating in the bathtub. She shrieked, "Tamara Carter, what have you done?" "I'm bathing, mother," Tamara Carter replied, her voice soft and gentle. "Since you're here, third sister, why don't you join us?" Chapter 8. With that, she suddenly reached out, grabbed Lily Carter's head, and unceremoniously shoved her into the bath. Lily Carter's mouth landed directly on Emily Carter's face. The cold, rigid touch sent a shiver down her spine, and she let out a scream of terror. Tamara Carter laughed coldly, her grip unwavering. She ripped Lily Carter's clothes, forcing her to swallow several mouthfuls of bathwater. Disoriented and terrified, Lily Carter barely noticed her torn garments as she scrambled out of the tub, supported by the attending maids, and fled, sobbing hysterically. Tamara Carter retrieved the long sword and walked towards the low wall. With a sudden swing, another scream pierced the air. The servant ordered to watch her from atop the wall had been struck in the eye. He tumbled to the ground, writhing in agony, as his companions carried him away. Quickly, a deathly silence returned to the small courtyard. Finally, "Some peace," Tamara Carter murmured, releasing her clenched jaw. She sighed, a trickle of crimson blood tracing a stark line against her pale face. Her features, breathtakingly beautiful, were also undeniably eerie, like a vengeful ghost. Hidden within the dilapidated wardrobe of the wooden house, Lucas Sterling shuddered involuntarily, his heart constricting sharply. Perhaps, he shouldn't have been hiding there, watching. But his curiosity had been overwhelming. He couldn't understand how the meek little rabbit had transformed into a ferocious predator. Everyone whispered that she was possessed, and he, in his youthful recklessness, had wanted to see this demon manifest. Yet, when he saw her cradling Emily Carter's body, her expression both tender and sorrowful, a strange emotion struck him. Fear? No. He felt an overwhelming sense of grief and pain, a sorrow so profound it was almost unbearable. He closed his eyes, trying to control his breathing. After a long moment, he opened them again. Tamara Carter had finished preparing Emily Carter, laying her on the bed. She dragged another bathtub in and filled it with buckets of hot water. Once full, she blew out the candle with a puff and slowly removed her gray robe. Lucas Sterling's eyes widened again, his heart, which had only just calmed, now pounded erratically, threatening to burst from his chest. The faint moonlight streamed through the window like flowing water, illuminating her figure. She seemed to glow, lighting up the dim wooden house and dazzling his eyes. Observing the jade-like form drawing closer, his mind raced, unsure how to react. Amidst this tension, Tamara Carter suddenly reached out and pulled an old brassiere from a clothesline within the wardrobe. Perhaps the brassiere was too worn, she sighed softly and shook her head. Her jet-black hair swayed gently, rippling in captivating waves. Lucas Sterling felt himself drowning in their allure. Lucas Sterling grimaced, silently chanting a calming mantra. Behave, he thought, this girl might be a vengeful spirit, draining the life essence of the living. I mustn't act rashly. However, he mused, it's rare to encounter such a bewitching female spirit. Even a demonic allure can be intoxicating. But this girl is fiercely aggressive. Aren't you afraid she'll bare her fangs and bite you, leaving your teeth scattered on the floor? His inner voice cautioned. Biting, that sensation might be even more exquisite. He pondered. Lucas Sterling felt his senses overwhelmed by a burning desire. Fortunately, just as he was about to burst from the wardrobe, the woman before him turned and walked away, slowly sinking into the bathtub. He breathed a sigh of relief. Though the scene in the bathtub remained captivating, the intensity had lessened somewhat. With his composure, he could endure it. But, miss, he thought, it's just bathing. Couldn't you be a little quicker? Watching Tamara Carter leisurely splash water on herself, her jade-white arms and wet hair clinging to her beautiful face, Lucas Sterling's mind exploded once more. With a thud, he tumbled out of the wardrobe. Ah! Tamara Carter, lost in thought, shrieked. She snatched the clothes beside the tub, wrapping them haphazardly around herself. With lightning speed, she lunged towards the object that had just rolled out of the wardrobe. Damn it! She prided herself on her sharp hearing. Before bathing, she had confirmed the absence of anyone else before undressing. Who could have imagined someone silently hiding in the wardrobe? Who is this person? Why didn't I sense anything, she wondered. Mortified at being unknowingly observed, Tamara Carter launched an immediate attack. Her delicate hands transformed into sharp blades, striking directly at the intruder's collarbone. Lucas Sterling broke out in a cold sweat at this fierce assault. This Tamara Carter, he thought, her movements are so swift and decisive. But if she knows martial arts, why did she allow herself to be humiliated earlier? Or is she truly possessed by a spirit? This terrifying thought extinguished his lustful notions. He rolled aside, dodging her attack. Tamara Carter, her first strike failing, spun and kicked. Lucas Sterling quickly jumped back, engaging her in combat. Within the small wooden house, the two exchanged over a dozen blows in an instant. Tamara Carter, growing increasingly impatient with her inability to win, and her strength failing, stumbled. Lucas Sterling seized her arms, pulling her into an embrace. Let me go. Bastard. Tamara Carter, left with no other recourse, bit him. Lucas Sterling, yelping in pain, exclaimed, Tamara Carter, are you a dog? Tamara Carter froze, tilted her head, saw his face, and angrily shouted, Lucas Sterling, why is it you? Why can't it be me? After exchanging blows with her, Lucas Sterling, realizing her martial arts skills were high but not a match for his, felt at ease and chuckled, didn't we agree this afternoon that I'd visit your boudoir tonight? Shameless. Tamara Carter's eyes darkened with fury. Who visits by sneaking into someone's wardrobe? What do you know? This is called covert protection. Lucas Sterling said brazenly, I was afraid you couldn't handle things alone, so I came to help. And you treat my kindness like a dog biting Lu Dongbin. Look at my hand, bitten, ouch. It hurts. Tamara Carter seized the moment he cried out in pain and suddenly kicked him. Lucas Sterling clutched his stomach and wailed, I was just looking. I didn't kiss, bite, or do anything to you. Do you have to be so cruel? If I become a eunuch, will you serve me? His cries only fueled Tamara Carter's shame and anger, and she attacked him relentlessly. Caught off guard, Lucas Sterling received a punch to the eye, which immediately bruised. Enraged, he flung his sleeve, swift as an autumn wind sweeping fallen leaves. In moments, Tamara Carter was defeated, bound tightly with old clothes. Are you behaving now? Lucas Sterling smugly embraced her, planting a kiss. I'm quite domineering, don't even try to fight me. Such a great figure, feels amazing to touch too. He ran his hands over Tamara Carter's body. Seeing her glare, eyes nearly bleeding with rage, he withdrew his hand, chuckling, don't look at me with such resentment. I only looked at you, right? So, how about I let you look back? His usual licentiousness now fueled a desire to tame the fiery temper of the woman before him. He placed her on a chair, with a perverse grin, and began a striptease. He removed his outer robe first, revealing his firm chest, boasting to Tamara Carter, well. Strong enough. Nosebleed yet? Chapter 9, Oh, impressive composure. Lucas Sterling clicked his tongue. I'll continue undressing. This time, it's the pants. I'm really doing it. He truly wanted to see the embarrassed expression of this stoic woman. He unbuckled his belt, slowly lowering his pants to his navel. The stoic woman remained unmoved. This time, he was genuinely surprised, but what Tamara Carter said next chilled him to the bone. Go ahead and take them off. I've seen male corpses, thousands if not tens of thousands. I don't care about you, Tamara Carter said indifferently. Do you know what happens to that part of a man after he dies? Don't say it. I don't want to know. Lucas Sterling hastily pulled his pants up. This woman was truly a rare flower. 1,000 male corpses. How gruesome. He had just been fantasizing about her. How terrifying. Strange woman. Lucas Sterling muttered, putting his clothes back on. He cleared his throat and said, actually, I came to see you tonight on official business. Release me. Tamara Carter said coldly. Fine, I'll release you, but stop targeting my little brother. Lucas Sterling instinctively shielded himself. Her kick had nearly broken his bone. It was excruciating. If you dare to grope me again, I will cut it off and feed it to the dogs. Tamara Carter gritted her teeth. I wouldn't take it even if you offered it. Touched over 1,000 male corpses. Good heavens. Lucas Sterling shook his head in disgust, releasing Tamara Carter's hand. Are you any better than me? Tamara Carter rubbed her swollen wrist, coldly replying, you've been toyed with by 1,000 female corpses, even more disgusting. Nonsense. Where did the female corpses come from? Lucas Sterling exclaimed. Ultimately, everyone will become a corpse, including the women who toyed with you. Am I wrong? Tamara Carter challenged him with a glare. Wow. You really are, Lucas Sterling patted his forehead repeatedly, feigning mental distress. Enough talk, I came here to discuss Sophia Carter, the second Miss Carter, with you. Tamara Carter rolled her eyes and sat down. Why do you think she killed Daniel Wright? Lucas Sterling asked seriously. Daniel Wright couldn't have died at her hands. Tamara Carter shook her head. You mean, this case involves a third party? Lucas Sterling frowned. Precisely. Tamara Carter thought for a moment then replied, I understand Sophia Carter's personality very well. She's fake, cruel, and social climbing, but I doubt she has the guts to kill Daniel Wright. It must have been some shady business between her and someone else, accidentally witnessed by Daniel Wright, that led to his murder. Then who would this third party be? Lucas Sterling paced back and forth in the room, hands clasped behind his back. Guessing won't get us anywhere, we need to investigate. Tamara Carter looked at him. Daniel Wright died in her boudoir. This secret must be crucial, otherwise, Cody Sterling wouldn't have jumped in. Lucas Sterling's lips curved into a slight smile. You mean, if we can grasp this secret, we can definitely deal them a heavy blow? Exactly. Tamara Carter stood up, her dark eyes cold and gloomy. Your Highness, I will keep a close watch on Sophia Carter at Carter Estate. If there's any clue, I'll inform you immediately. You'll have to work harder on the outside. I will. Lucas Sterling grinned at her. Cooperating with an intelligent woman is truly effortless. Tamara Carter gave him a cold glance. Isn't this what you expected? Indeed, I've been sincerely looking forward to this for a long time. Lucas Sterling nodded repeatedly. I thought there was no hope left. Unexpectedly, the eldest Miss Carter finally appeared, not disappointing me. Using a pair of pitiful, weak mother and daughter as informants, Your Highness, why? Tamara Carter tilted her head and asked. Why is why? Lucas Sterling countered. You clearly know Victoria Lennox is a she-wolf, yet you deliberately deliver lambs to her mouth, and even want the lambs to work for you. Don't you think this is a bit unreasonable? Tamara Carter stared at him, her gaze deep. Yet, this mother and daughter pair came from the countryside, have no connection to you, and shouldn't have any feud. Your actions are truly puzzling. Lucas Sterling sneered. I don't think I'm throwing lambs to the wolves. No one is born cruel. The weaker someone is, the greater their resistance. I'm tempering you, forging you into steel. Once you become strong, nothing can stop you. See, haven't I successfully tempered you? Now, I'm placing not a lamb, but a female cheetah, into Carter Estate. Cease justifying your cruelty. Tamara Carter scoffed softly. Fine, I won't waste my breath discussing compassion with a wolf. It's late, I wish to rest. Your Highness, please, make yourself comfortable. Feigning a gesture of dismissal, she watched Lucas Sterling depart with a sardonic smile. At the door, he turned, winking. I've left a sumptuous dinner in the wardrobe. Savor it slowly. Hearing your stomach rumble distressed me. With another burst of unrestrained laughter, he vanished. Sighing, Tamara Carter opened the wardrobe. Inside, a food container, still warm, emitted an enticing aroma. It struck her then, she hadn't consumed anything since morning. Preoccupied, she hadn't noticed the hunger until now, when it gnawed relentlessly. She devoured the meal, leaving the container utterly empty, then exhaled in satisfaction. At the third prince's residence, James Allen stammered, observing his master ravenously consuming a table laden with food. My lord, wasn't a meal delivered? Why this hunger? Without looking up, Lucas Sterling replied, intercepted by a she-leopard. She-leopard? James Allen's interest piqued. Where, my lord? I'll skin it and make you a coat. A coat? Lucas Sterling chuckled, his words slightly slurred. Excellent idea. But such delightful sport. I can't let you interfere. Just wait. Once I've tamed this she-leopard, I'll skin her myself. That sleek, glossy hide. I covet it. In the stillness of late night, Tamara Carter lay awake, staring through the window at the faint glow of the sky, lost in thought. Sleep would elude her tonight. She wasn't the only one. In a lavishly appointed bedroom, Victoria Lennox berated Edward Carter incessantly, criticizing his incompetence for failing to control a mere teenage girl. Her crimson-tipped finger nearly jabbed his forehead. I don't care. Victoria Lennox snarled. Fine, you're useless. I'll handle it. She wants a grand burial for her mother. I'll bury her alive with her mother, damned for eternity. No, my lady. Edward Carter exclaimed. The Emperor suspects Sophia's involvement. We must remain silent, wait for this to pass. No rash actions. We can't risk further disaster. Chapter 10, Because of Sophia, I must eliminate her. Victoria Lennox ground her teeth. That little whore, as if possessed by a spirit. Every day she lives, Sophia is in greater danger. Edward Carter, frustrated and silent for a moment, spoke irritably, I warned you, didn't I? Don't push things too far. Emily Carter and her child are weak, practically on their deathbeds. Why must you compete with them? You hold the title of legitimate wife, everything within the Carters, inside and out, belongs to you. Why force them into a corner? Victoria Lennox abruptly stood, snapping, Edward Carter, don't forget, if it weren't for my family, you would still be a penniless scholar. How would you have achieved what you have today? I married you without regard for wealth or power. Was it to endure humiliation from your sickly wife and bastard daughter? Enough. Edward Carter, enraged by her tirade, also stood up sharply. I've never been able to control you anyway. Just keep causing chaos. The long, arduous night finally passed, and Tamara Carter opened her eyes, greeting the first rays of dawn. The weather was beautiful, the sun shining brilliantly in a clear blue sky dotted with white clouds. She went to the courtyard to fetch water and wash her face. A voice called from outside, Tamara Carter, by order of the Emperor. It was a procession of eunuchs sent by Alexander Sterling, a long line of dozens of them, each carrying red lacquer trays laden with gold jewelry, fine fabrics, and a complete set of ladies' garments, carefully held by the lead eunuch, Hilary Noble. Tamara Carter slowly knelt. After Hilary Noble finished reading the imperial edict and instructed the others to bring the items inside, he glanced at the dilapidated courtyard, his gaze settling on Tamara Carter. Despite her ragged clothes and lack of makeup, she exuded a compelling aura. Her beautiful, snow-like face held dark, straight eyebrows that slanted upwards towards her temples, and deep, black eyes, like ancient wells, undisturbed. As her gaze swept over them, a noble and pure aura emanated from her, like a pristine lotus flower, to be admired from afar, not to be trifled with. Hilary Noble, having lived long in the palace and seen countless beauties, had never encountered anyone as coldly compelling as this woman. In terms of mere appearance, she might not have matched Sophia Carter's delicate features, but her cold, pure aura made her unforgettable, otherworldly. Perhaps noticing his gaze, Tamara Carter inclined her head slightly and said, I've troubled you, eunuch. Hilary Noble, as if awakening from a dream, returned the gesture, exchanging polite words. Once the eunuchs had placed everything inside and were about to leave, Tamara Carter called out, wait. She turned and entered the dilapidated house, emerging shortly after with the tray of gold, distributing a piece to each eunuch, with Hilary Noble receiving 5, which made him so overjoyed he nearly jumped. The other eunuchs were also ecstatic, tucking the gold into their robes and thanking her in unison. Tamara Carter nodded slightly, saying nothing more, but the eunuchs sang her praises upon their return. They all saw her current circumstances were less than ideal, yet she was so generous, tossing gold around like pebbles. They all believed this young woman would achieve great things in the future. Tamara Carter's fingertips brushed over the gleaming gold, a faint smile playing on her lips. Adjusting her clothes, she opened the garden gate and stepped outside. Seeing her, the mansion's servants reacted as if they'd seen a ghost, their fear mixed with terror, but Tamara Carter ignored their strange stares and went directly to find Edward Carter. Edward Carter was having breakfast with Margaret Carter, Victoria Lennox, and Sophia Carter in the main hall. Seeing her, their faces darkened, and they simultaneously put down their chopsticks. Tamara Carter, unconcerned, walked up to Sophia Carter, patted her shoulder, and calmly said, Get up, you're in the wrong seat. What are you talking about? Sophia Carter glared at her with disgust. I said, you're in the wrong seat. Tamara Carter said contemptuously. This is the firstborn daughter's place. You've occupied it for too long. Today, it should be returned. Tamara Carter. Edward Carter threw his chopsticks down with a clang. Can you behave yourself? Father is a court official. Shouldn't he understand the hierarchy between legitimate and illegitimate children? Tamara Carter retorted without yielding. Illegitimate daughters are ranked below legitimate daughters. Am I wrong? Or does father want to challenge the rules established by the Longwell royal ancestors? She's sitting in the wrong place, but what about you? Victoria Lennox's anger was so intense that the veins on her forehead throbbed. Have you paid your respects to grandmother and father this morning? Second aunt, this is none of your business. Tamara Carter replied coldly. And what about me? Margaret Carter immediately jumped up. Grandmother is an elder, of course, it's your turn to speak. Tamara Carter sneered. However, I remember when I first arrived and paid my respects to grandmother, you said you hated being bothered and told me not to bother you again in the future. Oh, right, father also said the same thing. It seems that paying respects is a bothersome and hateful thing. As a filial granddaughter, I naturally have to obey the two elders. So, not paying respects is permitted by the two elders, isn't it? Her words left Edward Carter and Margaret Carter speechless with rage. They couldn't understand how the girl who was as timid as a steamed bun yesterday could change so drastically in just one day. This significant transformation stunned them, leaving them momentarily unsure how to respond. Tamara Carter persisted, continuing to pat Sophia Carter's shoulder. Sophia Carter, resorting to her usual spoiled tactics, put on a pitiful display, her eyes reddening and tears flowing like spring rain on pear blossoms, appearing weak and pathetic. Victoria Lennox, her face purple with rage, signaled with her eyes, and several burly servants surrounded Tamara Carter. Tamara Carter sneered, she truly didn't take these insignificant thugs seriously. She picked up the boning knife on the table, twirling it skillfully in her hand, her dark eyes flashing with a cold, murderous intent. She said lazily, Father, you see, there are always disobedient servants. I'll listen to you and teach them a good lesson this time. As soon as she finished speaking, the men lunged forward. Tamara Carter nimbly dodged, the boning knife flashing in a dazzling arc as it sliced towards their knees. The men initially thought Tamara Carter was cowering when she crouched down. They only realized something was wrong when a sharp pain shot through their knees. Looking down, they saw their kneecaps exposed, with bone showing white. While the bleeding wasn't profuse, their vulnerable tendons were severed, and they immediately screamed in agony. Seeing the burly thugs taken down by the uncanny Tamara Carter, Victoria Lennox's face paled drastically. Sophia Carter shrieked and threw herself into her arms. Margaret Carter was so terrified that she felt dizzy, and Edward Carter's legs began to tremble uncontrollably, causing the dishes and bowls on the table to clatter. Don't be afraid, Father. Tamara Carter picked up a rag, calmly wiping the blood off the bone knife. I can handle disobedient servants. This bone knife is quite handy, I like it. Now, you lot, if you don't crawl to find a healer, you might not be able to stand up for the rest of your lives. Don't blame me then. Tamara Carter tossed the knife onto the dining table with a clang, smoothed her clothes, elegantly sat down, and politely nodded to Margaret Carter and Edward Carter, Grandmother, Father, let's eat. She ate heartily, while the faces of those around her darkened, a wave of dizziness washing over them. The serving maids finally couldn't contain their terror, screaming, Demon! An evil spirit possesses her and kills. Chapter 11 They fled, Victoria Lennox also terrified out of her wits, momentarily forgetting about regaining face, and hurriedly helped Sophia Carter escape. Edward Carter and Margaret Carter also wanted to leave, but a cold glance from Tamara Carter made them obediently stay in their seats. Facing someone like Irene Dawson, they had never experienced such fear and panic. In reality, Carter Estate had numerous servants and hidden experts. If they attacked together, Tamara Carter, no matter how skilled, wouldn't stand a chance. However, everything happened so suddenly. What good were numerous experts? They weren't present. This young mistress before them could take their lives instantly. In truth, Tamara Carter did have the urge to kill these two immediately, cleanly and decisively, avoiding further entanglement in conflict with them. But this kind of kill 1,000 enemies, lose 800 of your own approach was far too costly. If she personally killed these two villains, she wouldn't avoid trouble herself. Her life was so precious, how could she compensate these two cheapskates? Besides, didn't they enjoy playing mind games? Fine, she'd be generous and play with them to their heart's content. Father, has the date for Mother's burial been set? Tamara Carter picked up some food with her chopsticks, casually asking. When do you want it? Edward Carter stammered. The day after tomorrow. Tamara Carter spoke in a near commanding tone. The weather is hot, it's best to bury her for peace. However, His Majesty has instructed us to hold a grand funeral. 2 days of preparation is a bit rushed, so Father will have to work hard. It must be grand and complete, isn't that right, Father? Edward Carter replied hoarsely, right, this shouldn't be delayed. I'll immediately send someone to arrange it. Having said that, he hurriedly fled the scene of the bloody breakfast, not even sparing a glance at his own mother. Seeing this, Margaret Carter could only feign weakness, covering her eyes with a handkerchief and sighing, my poor daughter-in-law. Your daughter-in-law is indeed pitiful. Mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, and she was so filial. Go and see her off. Tamara Carter, having finished her meal, put her arm around Margaret Carter and, without another word, escorted her out. Having lost control of her emotions and gone a bit too far just now, would Edward Carter and Victoria Lennox perhaps seek someone to eliminate her? Never mind, she'd take this old woman as a hostage first. With Margaret Carter's arm affectionately linked in hers, she strode purposefully through the gardens and across the entirety of Carter Estate, summoning the concubines and gathering the daughters, along with the entire household staff, for a grand assembly. She would make it clear to everyone present, from this day forward, Carter Estate would be different. Robert Collins, missing an ear thanks to her command, hovered miserably nearby, his feet never touching the ground. Fetch some silver from the vault. I'm feeling generous today and wish to reward all the staff. Tamara Carter announced brightly, her arms still around Margaret Carter. Even those who have insulted, beaten, or berated me will receive a reward. Consider the past forgiven and forgotten once the rewards are distributed. I will not pursue past grievances. However, should anyone dare to provoke me further, look at these men. Pointing at the earless men, she continued with a chilling smile, removing ears is merely a trifle. My true passion lies in dissecting bodies. It's a fascinating practice known as anatomy. Anyone who doubts me is welcome to volunteer. She twirled the bone-filleting knife in her hand, its glint flashing across Margaret Carter's face. Margaret Carter's legs buckled in terror, but Tamara Carter tightened her grip and hauled her back up. From a high rooftop, Lucas Sterling tossed a dried plum into his mouth, his eyes crinkling with amusement. That girl is more intimidating than I am, he chuckled. Dissecting bodies and calling it anatomy, such a gruesome threat. I must admit, I'm impressed. He would soon discover, however, that Tamara Carter's talk of dissection wasn't a mere threat. She meant it. The following afternoon, a frantic man burst into Carter Estate. It was David Parker, son of the chief minister of the capital. The usually composed young man was in disarray, crying out as he entered, "Celestial Carter, save me." Everyone exchanged puzzled glances, unsure who this Celestial Carter was. Robert Collins stepped forward to inquire, and David Parker clutched his arm, pleading, "Quickly, take me to your young mistress, Tamara Carter." Robert Collins was stunned. Tamara Carter, a celestial being? Impossible. She was clearly a demon, a queen of the underworld. Unbeknownst to him, Tamara Carter's recent success in solving 2 baffling cases, combined with her striking and aloof beauty, had earned her a reputation throughout the capital. People whispered that she was a celestial being, sent to address injustices in the mortal realm. Only those within Carter Estate saw her true, demonic nature. Samuel Parker, David Parker's father, had just presided over a murder case that morning. Henry Cooper, a resident of the capital's outskirts, had been killed in an argument. Mabel Price, an orphaned neighbor, had allegedly bludgeoned him to death with a brick against his own wall. Despite numerous witnesses and concrete evidence, Mabel Price refused to confess. Instead, displaying impressive martial arts skills, she kidnapped Samuel Parker in court, declaring that Tamara Carter must re-examine the case. Otherwise, Samuel Parker would share Henry Cooper's fate. Carrying her newly crafted dissection kit, Tamara Carter accompanied David Parker to the administrative court's mortuary to examine the body. According to David Parker, Henry Cooper had argued with Mabel Price that morning and been struck dead with a brick, his face covered in blood. Those who heard the commotion and rushed to the scene had witnessed the event. However, Tamara Carter immediately noticed a discrepancy. Judging by the body's surface reactions, the time of death exceeded 12 hours. In other words, when witnesses saw Henry Cooper slumped against the wall arguing with Mabel Price, he was already dead. David Parker was astonished. How is this possible? Someone must have helped him then. Who was it? Tamara Carter asked calmly. His wife, Helen Cooper. David Parker replied. Soon, Helen Cooper was brought in, a beautiful woman, dressed in mourning clothes, but Tamara Carter's sharp eyes noticed that underneath the mourning clothes was a brand new light green silk dress. She scoffed inwardly, not asking about the circumstances of the death, but instead what her husband had eaten last night. Helen Cooper was dumbfounded by the question, stammering a reply. Tamara Carter glanced at her and told her to wait outside. David Parker didn't understand her intentions. Tamara Carter then asked, "Do you want to save your father?" "Of course I do." David Parker stamped his foot. "Then, I want to perform an autopsy on Henry Cooper's body to find evidence. Can you handle the funeral arrangements?" Tamara Carter raised an eyebrow at him. An autopsy?" David Parker's eyes widened. "Is there a problem?" Tamara Carter countered. David Parker's throat bobbed repeatedly. The fleeting affection he had just developed for this cold, beautiful woman vanished in an instant. Outside the morgue, a duke, disguised as a bailiff, quickly slipped away, running to Lucas Sterling to recount the events with a mixture of fear and excitement. "She's actually going to perform an autopsy." Lucas Sterling shot up and dashed out like an arrow. This bloody scene was not to be missed. Inside the morgue, Tamara Carter, wearing a self-made waterproof suit and gloves fashioned from pig bladders, held a gleaming butcher knife and, with an impassive expression, sliced open Henry Cooper's chest. Ugh! David Parker covered his eyes, pursed his lips, and frowned. Chapter 12 This scene was truly gruesome, no different from a slaughterhouse. This woman. Lucas Sterling's heart tightened. A demoness? A monster? Or had she once been a butcher, sharpening knives and sticking pigs? On the dissecting table, Tamara Carter had slit open Henry Cooper's stomach, carefully examining the gastric juices. The food was largely undigested. Helen Cooper had been honest, her statement was accurate. Last night's dinner, after a whole night, was almost undigested. This could very well indicate a problem. Tamara Carter pursed her lips and instructed David Parker, "Call Helen Cooper in." Helen Cooper trembled as she entered. Seeing the bloody scene, her legs gave way, her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed to the floor. When she came to, the female butcher, knife in hand, looked at her with a cold expression. "Tell me, who did you kill your husband with last night?" Helen Cooper stopped denying and confessed the entire truth of the murder. Finding a lover and wanting to kill her husband, such matters were nothing new. Tamara Carter lowered her eyes, lazily cleaning her tools, when a languid voice spoke beside her ear. "I never would have guessed, you're a ruthless character." "Thank you for the compliment." Tamara Carter glanced indifferently at the man before her. Seeing him dressed as a bailiff, she scoffed, "Has His Third Highness changed professions?" Lucas Sterling said nothing, crossing his arms and looking at her thoughtfully. After a long while, he spoke, "Who are you, really?" Tamara Carter gave him a disdainful look and went to wash the stains from her hands. Suddenly, her waist was tightly gripped, her body stiffening. She remained frozen, still in a half-crouched position, her tongue numb, unable to speak. She glared at Lucas Sterling. "Hush," the man chuckled darkly, "let me take a closer look. Are you human or demon?" With that, he grasped her face, his calloused hands kneading and pinching her nose and ears, distorting Tamara Carter's features. Not stopping there, he pinched her neck, muttering, "Indeed, real skin. But why does it seem like you're possessed? Strange. Let me bite you and see if anything changes." Before he finished speaking, his white teeth flashed, biting hard into Tamara Carter's neck. Ouch! Tamara Carter nearly cried out in pain. Lucas Sterling clapped his hands and laughed, "All right. I know you're human, not a demon. A duke lost the bet, he has to strip naked and run around the courtyard." Tamara Carter was choked with rage. So, he tormented her just for a wager. This man, truly shameless. Hatred gnawed at her, but her body remained immobile. She could only suppress her anger and endure. After Lucas Sterling finished his cruel game, he poked her waist with a finger. A surge of warmth flowed through her meridians, finally transforming her from a living corpse back to a living person. "Don't even think about revenge." Lucas Sterling shook his head smugly. "You know you're no match for me." Tamara Carter lowered her eyes, silent, and carried her medicine chest out. Seeing her lack of retaliation, Lucas Sterling felt slightly uneasy. He tugged her sleeve and called out, "Hey, why aren't you fighting back?" Tamara Carter slowly turned her head. Lucas Sterling made a face at her, sticking out his tongue provocatively. She blinked, pretending to turn away, but at the last moment, she struck. Her slender hand locked around Lucas Sterling's throat. The sneak attack was successful. Lucas Sterling's eyes bulged as she choked him. His pale face gradually turned a liverish hue. Tamara Carter raised an eyebrow, carefully calculating the time, releasing her grip just as he was about to suffocate. Cough, cough, this woman, truly vicious. Lucas Sterling slumped to the ground, rubbing his neck. Tamara Carter's eyes flashed, her voice cold, "Don't provoke me. Otherwise, I have many ways to kill you, and no one will ever find out." Lucas Sterling rolled his eyes. "Do you really have that kind of ability? Do you want to be my test subject?" Tamara Carter raised an eyebrow. Lucas Sterling suddenly sat up, lowering his voice, "So, if someone had the same abilities as you, could you find their weaknesses?" Tamara Carter frowned. "What are you getting at?" "A skeleton from 10 years ago." Lucas Sterling said cryptically. "When she died, there weren't any injuries or suspicious marks on her body. They all said she died of excessive grief, but I know she wouldn't have died unless someone harmed her. Now, all that's left is a pile of bones. Can you find evidence of foul play on those bones?" "I can. But why should I help you?" Tamara Carter challenged. "Because I'm stronger than you." Lucas Sterling grinned wickedly, and like a whirlwind, he swept towards her. In the next instant, Tamara Carter was in his arms, soaring through the air like a great bird. Darkness fell before her eyes as he covered them with his sleeve. She only felt the wind whistling past her ears, swift as lightning. After a long while, she felt her feet touch the ground. The darkness was deeper than before, and a peculiar scent lingered in her nose, both austere and pungent. "Where is this place?" she asked in a low voice. "Graveyard," Lucas Sterling said, then struck a flint and lit the oil lamp hanging on the wall. In the dim light, Tamara Carter clearly saw her surroundings, resembling a stone chamber. In the center rested a white jade coffin, surrounded by tables and chairs seemingly made of the same material. Paintings on the walls, also seemingly of a special material, emitted a soft, white glow. Lucas Sterling stepped forward and opened the lid of the white jade coffin. Tamara Carter moved closer, glanced inside, and couldn't help but sigh. Having worked as a medical examiner for so many years, she had never seen remains so meticulously cleaned and beautifully presented. She assumed special herbs had been used, as there was no unusual odor. It was a perfect match for the gleaming white jade coffin, like a flawless work of art. Beside the jade coffin stood a white jade vase holding a bouquet of blossoming flowers. This scene, though somewhat unusual, brought Tamara Carter a sense of comfort. Her own office had been similar, with fresh flowers on her desk next to a skeleton. Fresh flowers and skulls could indeed coexist. She spoke cheerfully, "Did you arrange all of this? Is something wrong with it?" Lucas Sterling's eyes darkened. "No, it's beautiful." Tamara Carter shrugged. "You did a great job. This is, the 10-year-old remains you mentioned?" Lucas Sterling nodded, carried the oil lamp over, shone it on the remains, and said, "Examine her. Determine the cause of death." Tamara Carter leaned forward, carefully examined the body, and after a moment, looked up and said, "She was strangled." Strangled? But why wasn't there any change in her facial expression at the time of death? Lucas Sterling asked hurriedly. "If I were to precisely constrict your arteries here," Tamara Carter placed her hands on either side of Lucas Sterling's carotid arteries, completely cutting off blood flow to your head instantaneously, how could there be the typical signs of asphyxiation, like a purple face? Whoever did this must have knowledge of forensic techniques. ####Chapter 13 Lucas Sterling stared at her, eyes bloodshot and bulging, a terrifying, frenzied look that made Tamara Carter involuntarily shudder. Could this man be a serial killer? In the next moment, Lucas Sterling suddenly gripped her shoulders, shook her violently, and roared, "Impossible. This is impossible. Absolutely impossible. You're lying, you damned woman, you're lying." Tamara Carter, her head spinning from being shaken, firmly replied, "I'm not lying. Her hyoid bone is severely fractured on both sides. She was absolutely strangled. Haven't you always suspected this? Otherwise, why bring me here?" "No. It's not like that." Lucas Sterling suddenly collapsed to the ground in anguish, large tears streaming from his deep-set eyes. "Why? Why is it like this? All of this, why? Why?" He repeatedly asked, why, his emotions nearly out of control. Tamara Carter was astonished. This man, weeping so wretchedly, was a far cry from the frivolous fool she remembered. For a moment, she found it hard to adjust, simply staring at him in a daze. But she didn't expect this innocent look to provoke the enraged second prince on the floor, who roared at her, "What are you looking at? Look again and I'll gouge your eyes out. James Allen, throw this damned woman out, I don't want to see her again." No matter how calm Tamara Carter was, she was enraged by these words, feeling a stampede of fury within her. "Damn it, did I want to come to this hellhole? Didn't you drag me here? You don't want to see me, but I want to see you. Or do you think your snot bubbles are more adorable and beautiful than a person?" She snorted coldly, turned to leave, but suddenly felt her waist stiffen, falling victim to Lucas Sterling's move again. After putting her down, James Allen appeared from nowhere, covered her face with a black cloth, hoisted her over his shoulder, and walked out. Tamara Carter, at her age, had never been toyed with like this, and was so angry she could spit blood, but she didn't know the mystical art of pressure points, so she had no choice but to silently endure. After a period of being airborne, Tamara Carter finally saw the light again. She was once again standing in front of the administrative court's mortuary. The warm afternoon sun shone on her face, making her slightly dizzy, and the previous scene felt like a bizarre dream. Tamara Carter sighed, adjusted her clothes, and walked towards the administrative court hall. In the corridor leading to the hall, she happened to meet David Parker. Seeing her, David Parker almost knelt down, stammering, "Immortal Carter, where have you been? I was worried sick. Please come quickly. Mabel Price refuses to release my father until she sees you." "Is that so?" Tamara Carter was both amused and exasperated. Mabel Price truly gave her a lot of face. The two walked through the corridor and soon arrived at the hall. Chief Minister of the Capitol Samuel Parker had fainted several times and wet himself thrice by this point. Seeing his son finally bring Tamara Carter, he cried and wailed with emotion, his face covered in tears and snot. This fat old man blows snot bubbles even more unsightly than that second prince. Tamara Carter frowned slightly and looked up at the heroic Mabel Price, who dared to kidnap the chief minister of the Capitol. Mabel Price seemed to be the same age as her current body, around 15 or 16 years old, with a reddish-dark complexion, a round face, round eyes, and a round figure, not fat, just adorable. Facing the dense crowd of officials and soldiers, she showed no fear, one hand tightly gripping Samuel Parker's collarbone, the other casually eating sunflower seeds, scattering the shells everywhere. Seeing her, Mabel Price was overjoyed, her face the very picture of a fan meeting their idol, and exclaimed dramatically, "You are the great immortal Carter, the Tamara Carter who solves strange cases and clears false accusations." Tamara Carter's lips curled slightly. It felt good to be admired and praised. She liked this girl. "Master Parker, before agreeing to help, I asked your son to promise me one thing on your behalf, which is to pardon Mabel Price. What do you think?" Tamara Carter spoke calmly. "Yes, yes, yes. Have this little miss release me first." Samuel Parker hastily replied. "Words are not proof, put it in writing." Mabel Price shouted. Samuel Parker glared at her hatefully. Tamara Carter said calmly, "With so many witnesses outside, what need is there for written documentation? Master Parker is the parental official of the Capitol, how can he go back on his word? Master Parker, you wouldn't secretly send someone to kill her, would you?" "No, no. Absolutely not." Samuel Parker shook his head repeatedly. Mabel Price looked at Tamara Carter, suddenly grinned, revealing pearly white teeth, her round eyes crinkling into a line as she nodded at Tamara Carter. "Thank you, sister." Tamara Carter smiled faintly and said, "Let go. Master Parker is magnanimous and won't hold a grudge against you. Bow your head and apologize to him, and this matter will be considered settled." "Bow my head and apologize?" Mabel Price's eyes widened. "He was clearly the one who falsely accused me." Tamara Carter silently looked at her without saying a word. Mabel Price whimpered, finally kneeling obediently and kowtowing several times, "Master, your lordship is magnanimous, please spare Mabel Price. Pity Mabel Price, without father or mother, only a lonely soul, only this lowly life. Your lordship's life is so precious, please don't bother with this lowly servant girl. If your precious life is lost because of this lowly servant girl, it would be truly unworthy." Tamara Carter turned her face away. Was this an apology? It was clearly a threat. Samuel Parker's face contorted, and he hurriedly waved his hand, get out, don't let me see you again." All right, I'm leaving." Mabel Price laughed, the dimples at the corners of her mouth rounding. She intimately took Tamara Carter's hand and said, "Good sister, can Mabel Price follow you from now on?" "Follow me?" Tamara Carter shook her head in refusal. "No, you should return from whence you came." Having said that, she brushed her robe and walked out gracefully. The crowd watching the commotion automatically made way for her, but they were still reluctant to leave, clinging to her back, whispering and gossiping. Today, Tamara Carter was dressed in men's clothing, a pristine white silk robe, a jade belt at her waist, and her cloud-like black hair tied high with a silver hairpin. She was tall, and the men's clothing suited her even more. As she walked, her clothes fluttered, dashing and handsome, causing the onlookers to stare in a daze. Men were captivated, and women's hearts pounded, unable to restrain themselves from seeing her off for a long distance before finally stopping. Mabel Price persistently followed, muttering softly, "Good sister, please take me in. I can wash clothes, cook, chat, brag, and even fight and charge. I'm a good hand at everything, inside and out. Sister, you're like a bodhisattva, how can you bear to see me lonely and helpless?" Tamara Carter, though not fond of smiling, was amused by her at this moment. She stopped and said seriously, "Mabel Price, it's not that I don't want to take you in, but my life is even more lowly than yours. I don't know what day it will be trampled into mud. Since you know me as Tamara Carter, you should know that following me will certainly bring countless dangers." ### Chapter 14, If Sister Says So, Mabel Price should follow you even more. Mabel Price clutched her robe tightly, her round eyes fixed on her. Sister is an orphan, and Mabel Price is also an orphan. Your head could fall at any moment, and so could Mabel Price's. Two unsteady heads together, even if they fall, will have company. Isn't that more joyful than being lonely? Tamara Carter was stunned, a thin layer of mist gradually appearing in her eyes. The words of this young woman before her almost brought her to tears. She sighed and said, "I've made the dangers clear to you. If you insist on following me, and lose your life later, don't let your restless ghost pester your sister for revenge." With this sister acknowledgement, considerate agreed, Mabel Price jumped for joy, swiftly snatching the toolkit and slinging it over her shoulder. She chuckled, "Good sister, if I become a ghost, I'll ask for a handsome young man to serve me. What would I need you for?" Tamara Carter couldn't help but laugh, "You sly girl. This is considered sly." Mabel Price stuck out her tongue. "Sister, let me tell you a few more sly remarks to amuse you. Chang'an, coffin shop." Edward Carter stared at the jet-black coffin, his face grim. Startled awake by Tamara Carter's commotion that morning, his heart pounding with fear, he rushed out to arrange Emily Carter's funeral arrangements. After bustling around for half a day, his fear gradually subsided. Victoria Lennox wasn't wrong, keeping this girl around would eventually lead to disaster. But how could he eliminate her without anyone knowing? He tapped the coffin lid, lost in thought. Just then, the shopkeeper said, "Let me tell you a touching story. Yesterday, back in my hometown, a young woman lost her mother. The young woman was heartbroken, and on the day of the funeral, she struck the coffin and died, following her mother. Such a filial daughter. Everyone praised." Hearing this, a spark ignited in Edward Carter's mind, striking the coffin, death. A surge of excitement coursed through him. Tomorrow was Emily Carter's burial, his daughter, also very filial. If she were to die by striking the coffin, and if he handled it discreetly, perhaps no one would suspect anything. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows on the somewhat gloomy path, Mabel Price, carrying a load of equipment, hummed a tune as she trailed behind Tamara Carter. Tamara Carter's mood was relatively good, but as her gaze fell upon the dark forest ahead, her heart sank. Dozens of masked men in black, brandishing cold steel blades, surrounded them from all directions like a dark cloud, obscuring the last rays of sunlight. Tamara Carter's nose twitched, she seemed to smell the metallic scent of death. "I told you not to follow me." Tamara Carter sighed. "Look, the life you just saved is about to be lost again." Mabel Price pouted. "Afraid of them? It's been a while since I've killed anyone, my hands are itching." "You bastards, come here. I'll let you taste Little Red." With that, she untied the red sash around her waist. Tamara Carter then realized it was an intricately crafted whip. Lacking a suitable weapon herself, she, after a moment's thought, gripped her scalpel. Mabel Price laughed at her, "Sister, you're too ordinary. This kills very quickly." Tamara Carter raised the scalpel, her figure flashed, and she charged towards the dark forest. She wasn't an ordinary forensic examiner. Before becoming one, she was a special forces operative, and the person who recruited her was the same female forensic examiner who had saved her mother. From 18 to 24, 6 full years, she couldn't count how many dangerous missions she had undertaken, how much bloodshed she had witnessed. Therefore, she didn't even bat an eye at the men before her. Shadows flickered, a sinister wind gusted, and a bloody massacre silently commenced in the pale green mist.